Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. My family is messed up. Like, seriously dysfunctional in that specific way only old money families can be. You know the type. Designer everything, country club memberships that cost more than most people's mortgages, and enough passive aggressive tension at dinner parties to power a small city. But I never thought it would come to this. I never thought my own mother would actually slap me across the face in front of 35 people at our family's annual summer gathering. And I definitely never thought my sister, Victoria, would have the audacity to demand I sign over a $9.7 million estate like she was asking me to pass the salt. But here's the thing about wealthy families that nobody tells you. Money doesn't just talk, it screams. And when there's enough of it on the table, people you thought you knew your whole life turn into strangers. Worse than strangers, actually. They turn into predators. I should probably start at the beginning, or at least somewhere that makes sense. My name's Charlotte, and up until about 6 months ago, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. Sure, my family was complicated, whose isn't, but I had my career as an art curator, my ridiculously overpriced loft in Tribeca, and what I believed was a decent relationship with my older sister Victoria. We weren't best friends or anything, but we did brunch occasionally, exchanged carefully curated gifts on birthdays, and maintained that polite distance that seemed normal for siblings in their 30s. Victoria had always been the golden child, literally. Blonde hair that looked like spun gold, blue eyes that could convince anyone of anything, and this way of moving through the world like she owned every room she walked into. Meanwhile, I was the dark-haired, bookish younger sister who asked too many questions and spent too much time in museums. Mom never let me forget which one of us she preferred. Our father, Richard Ashford III, died when I was 23, and Victoria was 27. Massive heart attack at 58, right in the middle of a business lunch at Les Bernardins. Very on brand for him, honestly. He'd always been intense about work, about legacy, about the Ashford name meaning something. He'd built his fortune in commercial real estate, nothing glamorous, just buying and developing properties across the Northeast until he owned half of downtown Boston and a good chunk of Manhattan. When he died, everyone assumed the bulk of his estate would go to Mom and be divided between Victoria and me eventually. That's how these things usually work in families like ours. But Dad had other ideas. Turns out he'd set up this incredibly complex trust structure that none of us fully understood until recently. The estate, the properties, the investments, all of it was locked up in trusts with very specific conditions. For 7 years after his death, Mom had control of everything as the trustee. She managed the properties, collected the rents, made the investment decisions. Victoria and I each got a generous monthly stipend, enough to live very comfortably, but not enough to be completely independent. It was Dad's way of keeping us connected to the family business, I guess. Or maybe it was just his way of controlling us from beyond the grave. But here's where it gets interesting. According to the trust documents, which I'd read exactly once right after Dad died, and then promptly forgot about because they were dense as hell and full of legal jargon, when I turned 30, something was supposed to change. There was some clause, some provision that Dad's lawyer, Harrison Cole, had mentioned at the reading of the will, something about a reassessment of the trust structure. I honestly hadn't thought about it much because 30 seemed so far away, and then suddenly I was 29, and then the invitations went out for my 30th birthday party. That's when things started getting weird. Victoria suddenly wanted to do everything together. Shopping trips to Bergdorf's where she'd insist on buying me things I didn't need, long lunches at places with 2-month waiting lists, weekend trips to the Hamptons where she'd get weirdly intense about reconnecting as sisters and remembering what's really important in life. At first, I thought maybe she was going through something, a breakup, a career crisis, who knows. Victoria had been engaged twice and called it off both times, so drama wasn't exactly new for her. But then Mom started acting strange too. She'd always been cold, that's just who she was, very proper Connecticut boarding school energy, but she got downright hostile whenever I asked questions about the trust or the properties. When I mentioned maybe wanting to get more involved in the family business, maybe learn about the real estate portfolio, she shut me down so fast my head spun. "You focus on your little art galleries, Charlotte," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. "The business side is handled." Her little art galleries. I was a senior curator at one of the most prestigious modern art museums in New York. But sure, Mom, whatever helps you sleep at night. The family gathering happened on the last Saturday in June. Mom hosted it at the estate in Greenwich, this absolutely massive Georgian colonial that Dad had bought back in the 90s. 6 acres of manicured lawns, a pool that could host Olympic trials, and enough rooms that you could go days without seeing another person if you wanted to. It was the kind of place that appeared in Architectural Digest, the kind of place that screamed old money even though Dad had been firmly new money. The guest list was the usual suspects: aunts, uncles, cousins I barely knew, family friends who were really just business associates, and various hangers-on who somehow always made it onto Mom's invitation list. Everyone dressed in their summer finest: linen suits, sundresses that cost 4 figures, pearls that had been in families for generations. Champagne flowed, waiters circulated with tiny, perfect hors d'oeuvres, and someone had hired a string quartet that played on the terrace overlooking the pool. I'd arrived late because of a work thing. An important collector had wanted to meet about a potential donation, and by the time I got there, everyone was already 3 drinks in and the party was in full swing. Victoria found me immediately, like she'd been watching for me. "Charlotte, finally!" She swept me into a hug that smelled like Chanel No. 5 and champagne. "Mom's been asking for you. Come on, she wants to make a toast." Something in her voice made my stomach clench, but I followed her through the crowd to where Mom was holding court on the main terrace. She stood there in a white linen dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, diamonds glittering at her throat. When she saw me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "There she is," Mom announced, and suddenly everyone was looking at me. "Our birthday girl." It wasn't my birthday for another 2 weeks, but okay. Harrison Cole, Dad's lawyer, now Mom's lawyer, stood next to her, looking uncomfortable in his charcoal suit despite the heat. He was probably in his mid-60s, all distinguished gray hair and quiet competence. He'd been Dad's friend since college, and I'd always liked him. He seemed like the only genuinely decent person in my parents' orbit. "Charlotte, sweetheart, we have something important to discuss," Mom said, her voice carrying across the terrace. The string quartet had stopped playing. Everyone had gone quiet. That's when Victoria stepped up beside Mom, and I noticed she was holding something. A folder. Official-looking documents. "As you know," Mom continued, addressing the crowd more than me, "Charlotte is about to turn 30, and according to the terms of Richard's trust, certain adjustments need to be made." My heart started pounding. I looked at Harrison, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "We've decided," Victoria said, her voice bright and confident, "it would be best for everyone, for the family, for the business, for the legacy Dad built, if ownership of the Greenwich estate transferred to me." "Wait, what?" "The estate is worth approximately $9.7 million, Mom added like she was discussing the weather, and given Victoria's superior business acumen and her commitment to maintaining the family's interests, we believe this is the right move." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" Victoria opened the folder and pulled out papers. "It's very simple, Charlotte. You just need to sign here, transferring your interest in the property to me. Harrison has everything prepared." The world tilted sideways. My interest? I don't understand. I thought Mom owned the estate. "Technically," Harrison said quietly, finally looking at me, "the estate is held in the trust, and according to the terms your father established, at your 30th birthday, ownership transfers to me," I finished, my voice barely a whisper. "It transfers to me." The silence that followed was deafening. "Don't be ridiculous," Mom snapped. "Your father never intended for you to own this property outright. You're completely unprepared for that kind of responsibility." I'm 30 years old and I run a department at a major museum. You play with paintings, Victoria interrupted, her smile turning sharp. This is real property, real money, real responsibility. You'd just screw it up. I looked around at all the faces staring at me. Aunts and uncles who'd known me since I was born, cousins I'd grown up with, family friends who'd attended my college graduation, and not one of them looked surprised. They all knew. This whole party, this whole gathering, it was staged. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice shaking. Mom's face went hard. "Charlotte, don't be difficult." "I'm not being difficult. I'm just not signing away my inheritance because you decided I should." "Your inheritance," Victoria laughed, actually laughed. "You think you deserve this place? You, who couldn't even bother to visit Dad when he was dying? Who was too busy with your career to spend time with your family?" That was a low blow, and completely untrue. I'd been at the hospital every day during Dad's final weeks. "Victoria, that's not—" "Sign the papers, Charlotte." Mom's voice had gone ice cold. "No." And that's when she hit me. My own mother, in front of 35 people, slapped me hard enough that my head snapped to the side, and my vision went white for a second. I heard gasps from the crowd, someone's champagne glass shattering on the terrace stones. "You have no other choice," Margaret hissed, her face inches from mine. "Do as you're told." I stood there, my cheek burning, tasting blood where I'd bitten my tongue. I'd be damned if I'd cry in front of these people. That's when Harrison Cole stepped forward, and the look on his face was something I'd never seen before. Pure, ice-cold fury. "Margaret," he said quietly to my mother, "do you know who actually owns this estate?" The words hung in the air like a bomb about to detonate. Mom turned to him, confident, dismissive. "The trust owns it, Harrison, as you very well know, and I'm the trustee." "Were the trustee," Harrison corrected. "Your trusteeship ended at midnight on Charlotte's 30th birthday, which, if you'd bothered to check the calendar, was actually yesterday." I blinked. Yesterday? But my birthday was— Oh God, he was right. With everything going on at work, I'd completely lost track. I'd turned 30 yesterday, June 29th, not in 2 weeks like I'd thought. The color drained from Mom's face. "And as for who owns this estate," Harrison continued, pulling out his own set of documents from his briefcase, "according to Richard's will and the trust documents, which I drafted personally, full ownership transferred to Charlotte Ann Ashford at 12:01 a.m. on June 29th, 2024. Not partial ownership, not shared ownership, complete, uncontested ownership." You could have heard a pin drop. "That's impossible," Victoria said, but her voice had lost all its confidence. "Dad would never—" "Your father," Harrison said, his voice cutting, "made his intentions very clear. He established the trust specifically to ensure that Charlotte, not Victoria, would inherit this property. He felt that Charlotte had the character, the integrity, and the judgment to handle it properly." "You're lying," Margaret said, but she was looking at the documents Harrison was holding, and I could see the panic setting in. "I'm not lying, Margaret, and you know I'm not. Richard told you about this provision when he established the trust. He told you multiple times. You chose to ignore it, or perhaps you thought you could manipulate Charlotte into signing it away before she realized what she owned." I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. "The entire estate? The house, the property, everything?" "Everything," Harrison confirmed, "plus the investment portfolio associated with it, which currently values at approximately $3.2 million. Your father set it up so that the income from those investments would cover property taxes, maintenance, and staff salaries in perpetuity." Holy shit. Holy actual shit. Victoria's face had gone from confident to pale to absolutely furious in the space of— "The staff can handle it," Harrison said quietly, and I realized he'd been prepared for this. Of course he had. He'd known exactly what Mom and Victoria were planning. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Victoria's screaming about lawyers and lawsuits, Mom crying, actual tears, which I'd never seen before, and trying to hug me while I physically pushed her away. Various family members trying to mediate or taking sides or just grabbing one more canapé before they were forced to leave. The waitstaff looking uncomfortable and confused. The string quartet packing up their instruments with impressive speed. Through it all, Harrison stood next to me like a very well-dressed bodyguard, occasionally making quiet phone calls and taking notes on his phone. Finally, blessedly, the house was empty, except for me, Harrison, and the staff, who'd retreated to the kitchen to probably gossip about the absolute shit show they'd just witnessed. I sank into one of the terrace chairs and put my head in my hands. What the hell just happened? Harrison sat down across from me, looking tired. Your mother tried to commit fraud, basically. If you'd signed those papers without understanding what they were, she and Victoria would have owned this property and you'd have had no legal recourse. How long have you known they were planning this? I suspected for about 6 months, when Margaret started asking very specific questions about the trust and making inquiries about property transfers. I didn't have proof until about 3 weeks ago, when she tried to get me to backdate the documents. She asked you to commit fraud? In not so many words, yes, that's when I knew I needed to protect you. He pulled out a thick envelope from his briefcase. These are copies of all the trust documents, your father's will, the property deeds, investment statements, everything you need. I've also prepared a summary in plain English because the legal language is deliberately obtuse. I took the envelope with shaking hands. Why didn't my father just tell me? Why all the secrecy? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Richard had his reasons. He believed that if you knew about the inheritance too early, it would change you, make you complacent maybe, or make you a target for your mother and sister even sooner. He wanted you to build your own life, your own career, your own identity separate from the family money. And then, when you were ready, when you'd proven yourself, which you have, by the way, he wanted you to have the resources to do whatever you wanted with your life. I felt tears starting, and this time I didn't fight them. I miss him. I know, he missed you too, even before he died. He used to talk about you all the time, about your exhibitions at the museum, about the articles you'd written. He was incredibly proud of you, Charlotte. He just wasn't very good at showing it. We sat there as the sun started to set over the manicured lawns, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. It was beautiful, and it was mine, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with it. What happens now? I asked. Now, Harrison said, you decide. You own this property outright. You can sell it, rent it, live in it, burn it to the ground if you want, though I'd advise against that last one for tax purposes. You also need to decide what to do about your mother and sister. What do you mean? Margaret has been living here rent-free for 7 years, managing the property and collecting the income from the trust. Technically, she owes you an accounting of every dollar that's come through the trust since your father died. If there are any irregularities, you'd be well within your rights to pursue legal action. I hadn't even thought about that. You think she's been stealing from the trust? Harrison's expression was carefully neutral. I think that when people have unsupervised access to large amounts of money, they sometimes make questionable decisions. I've already started a preliminary audit, and let's just say there are some discrepancies that need to be explained. Of course there were, because why would my family stop at just trying to steal my inheritance when they could have been stealing from the trust for years? I found this study on the second floor, exactly where I remembered it from childhood visits. Dad's desk was still there, covered in dust. His books lined the shelves, and behind a painting of some dead ancestor was a wall safe that I'd never known existed. My birthday, June 29th. I tried 0629 and heard the lock click open. Inside was a letter, sealed in an envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting, and underneath it, a small velvet box. I opened the letter first. Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means Harrison has done his job and you now own the Greenwich estate. It also means your mother and sister tried to do exactly what I was afraid they'd do. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from that scene, but I hope Harrison was there to set things straight. I know I wasn't a perfect father. I was too focused on work, too demanding, too critical. But I want you to know that I saw you, Charlotte. I saw your kindness, your integrity, your brilliant mind. I saw the way you looked at art like it was magic, the way you treated people with respect regardless of their status, the way you never let your mother or sister make you into something you weren't. That's why I'm leaving you the estate. Not because you're the youngest, not because of some arbitrary rule, but because I trust you. I trust you to do something meaningful with it. Maybe you'll turn it into a museum. Maybe you'll sell it and start your own gallery. Maybe you'll just live there and be happy. Whatever you choose, I know it will be the right decision because you have something Victoria never had, a moral compass. The box contains your grandmother's ring, my mother's ring. She would have loved you. She was an artist too, did you know that? Painted watercolors, nothing professional, just for the joy of it. She always said that art was the only honest thing in the world. Be happy, Charlotte. Be free. And don't let anyone, not your mother, not your sister, not anyone, make you feel guilty for taking what's rightfully yours. Love, Dad. I was full on crying now. Mascara definitely running, probably looking like a complete mess. I opened the velvet box and found a stunning Art Deco ring, platinum with a massive sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was the kind of ring you saw in museum exhibits, the kind that had history and weight and meaning. I slipped it on my finger. Perfect fit. That's when I heard the doorbell, then Maya's voice echoing through the house. Charlotte, where the hell are you? This place is enormous. Also, I brought 3 bottles of wine, and I'm not leaving until they're all empty, and you've told me everything. I wiped my eyes, took one last look at my father's letter, and headed downstairs to fill my best friend in on the absolute chaos that had become my life. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about inheriting a fortune and discovering your family is full of liars and thieves. It's weirdly liberating. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to play nice at family dinners, didn't have to accept Victoria's backhanded compliments, didn't have to endure Mom's constant criticism. I was free. Over the next few weeks, I learned exactly how free I was. Harrison's audit revealed that Mom had been siphoning money from the trust for years. Not huge amounts, nothing that would be immediately obvious, but enough that it added up to nearly $800,000. She'd been using it to fund Victoria's lifestyle, to pay for her engagement parties and designer wardrobes and luxury vacations. When confronted with the evidence, Mom tried to claim it was family money, and therefore she had a right to use it for her daughters. Plural. Harrison noted dryly, yet Charlotte never saw a dime of it. We settled out of court. Mom paid back $500,000, all she could scrape together, and in exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges. Victoria, meanwhile, had to sell her condo in Soho to cover her share of the debt. Apparently, she'd been counting on inheriting the estate to cover the mortgage she barely could afford. The family rallied around Mom and Victoria, of course. I was painted as the villain, the greedy daughter who turned on her own mother over money. Never mind that Mom literally tried to defraud me. Never mind that Victoria had orchestrated the whole thing. I was the bad guy because I'd refused to just roll over and let them steal from me. I cut them all off, every single one of them. Blocked numbers, blocked social media, returned letters unopened. Harrison handled all communication through lawyers. It was brutal, and it was painful, and it was absolutely necessary. But I also discovered something unexpected. I was good at this, at managing property, at making investment decisions, at running a business. Turns out all those years of curating exhibitions and managing budgets and negotiating with collectors had given me skills that translated perfectly to real estate management. I kept the Greenwich estate, but turned most of it into a private artist residency program. Young artists could live there rent-free for 6 months, with access to studio space and a stipend for materials. It was exactly the kind of thing my grandmother would have loved, the kind of thing Dad probably hoped I'd do. I also discovered that I had a half-brother. That bombshell dropped about 3 months after the inheritance drama, when a guy named Marcus showed up at my door with a lawyer and a DNA test. Turns out, Dad had had an affair back in the 90s, and Marcus was the result. He was 36, a civil engineer living in Chicago, and he'd only recently discovered that Richard Ashford III was his biological father. At first, I thought it was another con, another person trying to get a piece of the inheritance. But the DNA test was legitimate, and more than that, Marcus didn't want money. He just wanted to know about his father. We met for coffee. Awkward at first, because how do you talk to a secret half-sibling you never knew existed? But Marcus was genuine and kind, and nothing like Victoria. He told me about growing up not knowing his dad, about his mom who'd raised him alone, about finally getting answers after she'd died and he'd found old letters. "I'm not here to make trouble," he'd said. "I just wanted to meet you, to know that I have a sister. A sister, a real one, not the manipulative nightmare I'd grown up with." We got close over the following months. Marcus visited the estate, met Maya, even helped out with some of the renovation work for the artist residency program. He was basically everything I'd wished Victoria could have been: supportive, honest, actually interested in my life beyond what he could get from me. I told him about the inheritance drama, about Mom and Victoria's betrayal. He just shook his head. "You know what the crazy thing is? Dad left me something too, not in the will, but through separate trust. Not much, maybe $200,000, but enough to help with my daughter's college fund. He never met me, but he still took care of me." That sounded like Dad. Complicated, secretive, but ultimately trying to do right by people. The 1-year anniversary of my 30th birthday, my actual 30th birthday, not the fake one Mom had tried to celebrate, I threw a party at the estate. But this time, I controlled the guest list. Maya and her husband, Marcus and his family, some of my colleagues from the museum, the artists who were currently in residence, Harrison and his wife. We grilled on the terrace, swam in the pool, drank too much wine, and watched the sunset over the lawns. It was perfect. Not fancy, not formal, just happy. Harrison pulled me aside at one point, looking pleased. "Your father would be proud, you know, of what you've done with the place, with your life." "I hope so," I said, and I meant it. I never heard from Mom or Victoria directly after the settlement, but I heard through the grapevine that Mom had moved to Florida to live with your sister, that Victoria had moved to LA and was trying to make it as a lifestyle influencer or something equally ridiculous. They'd both apparently told anyone who would listen that I'd stolen their inheritance, that I manipulated Dad, that I was a horrible person. I didn't care. The truth was, I'd discovered something more valuable than $9.7 million. I'd discovered who I was without my family's dysfunction. I'd discovered real relationships built on honesty instead of obligation. I'd discovered that I could trust my own judgment, make my own decisions, build my own life. The estate became my sanctuary. I'd keep my job at the museum because I loved it, but I'd also pour energy into the artist residency program, into supporting young creators who needed a break, a chance, a space to work without worrying about rent. I'd take my grandmother's ring and wear it every day, a reminder that I came from artists and dreamers as much as I came from businessmen and social climbers. I'd build the life Dad had wanted for me, meaningful, honest, mine. Looking back on that day, the slap, the silence, the moment Harrison revealed the truth, I sometimes can't believe it actually happened. It feels like a movie, like something that happens to other people in other families. But it did happen, and it changed everything. My sister's plan to seize my inheritance didn't just collapse, it exposed the rot at the heart of my family. And in doing so, it set me free. I'm not gonna lie and say everything is perfect now. I have moments where I miss having a mom, even a cold and critical one. I have days where I wonder if I should reach out to Victoria, try to salvage something. But then I remember the look on her face when she demanded I sign over the estate, the absolute certainty that she deserved it more than me, and I know that some bridges are meant to burn. Last week, I got a letter from Mom. It made it past my filters because she'd sent it through a cousin I still occasionally talk to. Inside was a single page, her perfect handwriting, explaining how she'd been wrong, how she'd let her love for Victoria cloud her judgment, how she hoped someday I could forgive her. There was no apology for the slap, no acknowledgement of the years of favoritism and criticism, no real accountability, just a vague, mistakes were made energy that made my blood boil. I threw it away. Maybe that makes me cold, maybe that makes me unforgiving, but I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean allowing people to keep hurting you. It doesn't mean pretending that betrayal didn't happen. It means accepting what happened, learning from it, and moving forward without that person in your life. So yeah, that's my story. The moment my sister's plan to seize my inheritance collapsed was also the moment I finally saw my family clearly. And you know what? I'm better off for it. I've got my estate, my career, my real friends, my surprise brother, and my grandmother's ring. I've got a life that's genuinely mine, not some performance for people who never really cared about me anyway. And if Mom and Victoria want to spend the rest of their lives bitter about what they lost, that's on them. I'm too busy being happy.